Okay, it's 1974, 1975. I'm with my wife and another couple at the Colorado River, camped out on the bank of the river right by a bridge, and we're tripping. And what has happened is we're around a big campfire, and my wife made the campfire. My wife at the time, her name was Sharon, and it was the first campfire she ever made. And I didn't think too much about it, but she had made it from debris from inside the car, trash bags and things like that. Well, it turns out that one of the trash bags had a box of 22 shells in it from a hunting trip that I had been on the year before, where I was like trying to shoot rabbits and I couldn't shoot a rabbit. I just couldn't do it, so all the shells were unused. So there's a bag filled with 22 caliber shells sitting in the middle of a bonfire with 4 people around it who are peaking on acid about 4 feet away. All right? And we're having a great time. We're looking at the moon. The sky is sort of fragmenting prismatically into, you know, auras or auroras of light, and it's all very, very wonderful. And there's one of the logs kind of goes like that, and I thought, boy, this wood's kind of sparky, you know. And a bunch of sparks flew out, and I didn't think anything of it. Of course, I was sort of free associating at the time. A couple of seconds later, nothing happened again. A little explosion. Some pieces flew out of the fire, and it takes you a second to realize what's so-called consensus reality and what's subjective reality. And at that time, I heard kind of a pew, and in one of those sort of insightful, just instantaneous flashes, I knew what had happened. The shells, I hadn't even thought about the shells in 6 months, but I knew exactly what had happened. So I had to put the fire out. So somehow, I don't know how I'm functioning because I'm peaking on acid. I can barely move. I can barely crawl. I'm grabbing people and pushing them behind the car as these 22 shells are going like that. So I think I've got to put the fire out. So I'm actually not quite fully peaked. It's coming on like a locomotive at this time, and I start crawling down toward the water with a bucket. I have no idea where I got the bucket. Don't ask. I go down to the water. I'm in the dark. The ground is kind of undulating, like I seem to recall an image of it being like a bunch of snakes, kind of snakes in mud, except it was solid ground. Crawl down to the river. I get a bucket of water. I crawl back to the fire. Now I'm a commando. I'm crawling across the ground like this, and these 22 shells are going beep, 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 like that out of the fire. And about this time, this guy comes kind of bopping down the road going, "Hey man, somebody's shooting at us. What's going on?" That's my memory of it. Whether the guy was there or not, I'm not really sure. I have the bucket of water. I'm creeping up stealthily on the fire, and about this time, I'm pretty much fully on from the acid. And I get right in front of the fire. Now, I haven't thought through the consequences of throwing a bucket of cold water into a roaring bonfire at a range of about 2 feet while you're on acid. I get up there, I dump the water in, I'm kind of looking down at it, and of course there's this violent steam explosion, which I see in kind of separate jump cuts. You know, first there's no explosion, and then there's, you know, it sort of goes like that, and just knocks me backward. Not that I actually got hit by anything, but just perceptually knocked me backward, and I fell down the bank into the water. So I'm laying in the Colorado River. There's this big, you know, volcano of steam, and the tragedy was averted. There were 2 bullet holes in the car, and and nobody was hurt. So let that be a lesson to you, kids.
What's the lesson?
Another drug-related tragedy. No. Obviously, don't hunt rabbits. 1973, window pane acid, Needles, California, camped out on the bank of the Colorado River. You may notice a thematic motif here. Parked, camped right next to a long bridge, the Needles Municipal Town Bridge, which is no longer there.
Start over. Let's wait till the helicopter.
Okay, it's 1973, peaking on window pane acid on the banks of the Colorado River in Needles, California, about 50 feet from the Needles Municipal Town Bridge, which doesn't exist anymore, and having a good time watching the car headlights coming across the bridge as they are fragmented prismatically through the railing of the bridge. Very stroboscopic effect, and very hypnotic. under the influence of the LSD. I'm with 3 other people, my wife at the time, Sharon, and another couple, and the guy, the other couple, had never done acid before, and I had been working on him a little bit. I was a very supportive co-tripper. I'd been working on him about the police earlier, and he had generated some fairly severe paranoia, and we were joking that every time a car came across the bridge, it was a police car, and kind of working him up into a lather. Shouldn't have done it, and this went on for an hour or so, and every time a car came across the bridge, we'd see 10 times more lights than were really there, and think that the entire National Guard was descending on us, and got a big kick out of it. Finally, a car comes across the bridge, stops about 50 feet from us up at the top of the embankment, turns on a spotlight, shines down on us, illuminating the ground all around with just this pure white radiance. And it's a real cop. And this guy, who's been sitting on his sleeping bag the whole time, gets this incredulous look on his face, and he stands up in the middle of the spotlight and points at the police car and yells at the top of his lungs, "He's real! He's real!" like this. The cop, who already knew that he was real, must have thought that was something he did not even want to mess with. He got back in his car and drove away. End of story. True story. This is an experience on psilocybin mushrooms, which I had taken. I was on the downside, way past the peak, but still into fairly severe visual distortion. And I was sitting in the dark by myself, 4 o'clock in the morning, thinking. I had been watching television or something, and I was just sitting thinking, looking out the window. It had been perfectly calm, still, throughout the entire night. And as I looked out the window, I noticed the plants in the backyard, which were large ferns, starting to slowly undulate from side to side, as if they were being whipped by a strong wind. And there hadn't been a breath of wind. I'd been sitting outside in a lawn chair for a couple of hours previously, and there hadn't been a breath of wind. It was dead still, and these plants started moving. And I remember it very clearly because I was thinking that the window looked like an aquarium, and it looked like seaweed kind of moving in the aquarium. And I got this strange sense of dread for no tangible reason that I can remember. I focused it on maybe that there was a burglar, or there was a prowler, or something, and I reacted the way I normally do when I get a strong sense of dread. I went into the kitchen to make myself a snack. As I walked into the kitchen, this earthquake hit. It was a 5.9, I think, and all of a sudden, being on a hallucinatory drug and being hit by an earthquake was very bizarre experience. I remembered in a flash that my wife was sleeping under a painting which was mounted on the wall, which had always made me nervous. That was covered in glass, and it was about 4 feet wide. And all I could think of was that the earthquake was going to knock the painting off, it was going to shatter, and large shards of glass were going to hit her on the bed. So I started running. And I lived in a house that was very narrow and very, very long. I called it the Orient Express. It was like a 120-foot run from where I was standing to the bedroom. And I just started running, or maybe a 100-foot run. I just started running. And I'm running down this narrow corridor like a bat out of hell, and the power cuts out as a result of the earthquake, probably knocking down some power line. So I'm running in total blackness on a hallucinogen in an earthquake, and I run smack into the wall, knock myself out. So my wife is on her own from that point on. I didn't really knock myself out, but I was stunned, and it took me the duration of the rest of the earthquake to kind of come to and crawl along the floor and get into the bedroom. So
Did she wake up?
She slept through the whole thing, of course, but she always did. She missed all the good earthquakes.
But you went in and told her that you...
I'd saved her. I took credit for it. I normally have a pretty clear memory of the experiences on acid. This was on acid, but I have only a dim sense of what this really was. I had either double or triple dosed. I don't remember. And I was in a darkened room. It wasn't completely black, but it was quite dark. And I had been watching television. The television was on. And at the absolute peak of the experience, it formed like a tunnel where the television just went further and further away and just became this abstract light source that eventually, I recall it going red, and this very strong sort of roaring sound as if I was had my head stuck into a jet engine, maybe, and basically saw nothing, just this kind of inchoate void shot through with red light and this intense roaring sound, which eventually took on a kind of a rhythm, a surf-like rhythm. And then that gradually dissipated and came back to a more accurate view of the world, and then I could get up and function so on normally. But there was a period of, I'm not sure how long, it may have been 20 minutes to 2 hours, where I basically saw nothing.
Were you afraid?
No, I liked it. I thought it was cool. I was a little afraid in the sense that because you have no real bearings in a situation like that, you don't know how long it's going to last, or whether it will increase to a point where I never felt the total death of myself as a point of view in terms of like the death of ego idea. I always kind of knew that I was there checking this out, so I wasn't really afraid in that sense. My point of view hadn't dissolved completely.
But you think that was probably the most extreme experience?
For me, it was the most extreme experience because I was basically sitting there looking at things and not seeing anything. So it was a complete perceptual wall.
And how long do you think it lasted?
Could have been between 20 minutes and 2 hours. I have no sense of time. I'm sure that medically someone who knows more about the drug could be able to pin that down. It may have been 5 minutes to half an hour. It's very hard to say. It wasn't like it just all suddenly went black. It just became so abstract that it had no meaning. And it wasn't abstract in the sense of beautiful, intricate mandala geometrics or something like that. It was just raw, naked, black, primal stuff.
No sound either?
Just the roaring sound. No real sense of motion, though, like I was moving. Yeah, and I actually kind of liked it. I really liked. I liked being able to be there at that vantage point. I looked at it the way I look at almost all experiences in life. I liked the opportunity to be there and see that.
And was it? Did it have the feeling of being with God? Anything
No,
like that?
I've never had.
Aspect to it?
I've never had what you would call a spiritual experience in that sense. The closest I've come maybe was on mushrooms, a perception of certain universalities that maybe exist in all human minds at a certain level, that maybe are reached during a hallucinogenic drug experience, where you get down to some level in your mind, down in the limbic system or something that we all share in common. Maybe kind of like in the near-death experience, where everybody gets to the same level of brain function, and they see the same thing. I have no idea why I thought at the time that it was a universal thing, but I felt that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remembered that at that point too. This was on psilocybin mushrooms some time later. I remember at that point thinking that there was a sort of a separate reality. Bad choice of terms, but there was a separate reality in one's own continuum of brain function when one was on a hallucinogenic drug as opposed to day-to-day reality, and there was continuity through that. In other words, when you're on a trip, you can remember. I felt like I could remember previous trips and previous experiences in a way that I couldn't remember them when I was back to normal day-to-day reality. So I actually felt that there was the capability to build from one to the next.
And did you attempt that? Go back to some previous?
Not in the sense of direct memory, but there was a sense of a familiarity of certain sounds and physical experiences and visual distortions that I felt that I was on recognizable ground, recognizable terrain.
What about your worst experience?
Never really had a bad experience. I never really had a terrible...
Except running into the wall.
Except running into the wall, but that was... an earthquake descending on you in the middle of a trip, I suppose, is a bad experience. Yeah, I suppose that would probably be my worst experience, because the exact moment that the earthquake hit was like this tremendous jolt. It was like an explosion. At first I thought it was an explosion, like a mortar bomb or something like that, because, and once again, of course,
But you knew it was real.
I knew it was real. I knew that something was happening that was real, but that was like, that was the hand of God, because all of a sudden the house started to move. And take your normal reaction to an earthquake, which is that sort of sense of mortality, helplessness, inability to act, something larger than yourself, amplify it by 100 times, and that's what I felt at that moment. And that's why it made that so memorable, because it literally was, I'm not religious, but that's the closest I've ever come to directly feeling at a sort of physical and emotional level, that the hand of God, something that is so much bigger than me that I can't do anything about it. And also the helplessness of being slightly impaired physically and not able to deal with an emergency situation.
And has that experience affected how you feel about God anyway, now?
No. I'm sorry to report, news from the front, that I haven't changed my opinion about that. I've never had like a mystical experience that I don't necessarily believe that there's some other plane of existence that can be reached through hallucinogens. I only believe that what you're allowed to do on these drugs is take the sort of the deck of reality and play 52 pickup with it. Just throw all the cards in the air and let them land in different order, reshuffle it and see different associations. It just allows you to kind of get outside normal reality and look at it from the side. That's why I do it. I don't feel that I'm pushing through to something that really exists, that can only be reached this way. I know other people do believe that, but I don't. I feel that that's a trick of the mind. I think that there are certainly realms within my own mind that it allows me to explore, and it allows me to make associations and have sort of little perceptual leaps that I might not otherwise have. So it's certainly worth the price of admission.
Have you ever had experiences similar to these without drugs?
Oh yeah, sure, but to a lesser degree. Yeah, I think you can have that sort of experience just sitting and thinking, if you do it long enough. If you can exclude distractions enough and just concentrate on a given subject. They're just not as strong. You don't feel them at a physical level. I think one of the things about acid is that, or other hallucinogens as well, is that you can feel an intellectual thing at a physical level, and it has tremendous power as it sort of crashes through your body, and it makes it very memorable.
Are you able to be creative on acid?
On acid, no.
You've tried?
I've never actually even tried. I've never really been able to get up and move at the exact moment that I was having these thoughts. And it's a bit frustrating, because you know that you never remember them with the intensity that you perceive them at that particular moment.
You've never tried to write them down?
No. I've never tried to write them down at the time they were happening.
Or paint?
I don't think I could paint. But then my style of painting is very representational and very, very focused. I don't think I could just sort of start slashing around colors. Basically, I think your motor coordination is not good enough to be able to express what's happening. I don't feel very articulate. Other people may do that, and maybe that's a discipline that one can learn.
And you've never had a bummer?
No, I've never had a self-induced bummer, in that sense, of coming across some sort of dark corridor in my mind that I would have preferred not to open. All my acid trips were with my ex-wife Sharon, and she never had a bummer either. And I think sometimes I'm assuming that being with a person who maintains well emotionally may be significant.
Mm-hmm. Is it something you recommend to people that have never done it before?
Oh, it's a very guarded recommendation, because I don't think it's for everyone. I think that there are people that have a fairly fragile grasp of consensus reality as in their normal lives, and this would be the last thing that would help them. But I think that it's not as harmful as a lot of other people might assume it to be. I would recommend it to certain people.
You think it should be legal?
Well, I mean, obviously, subjectively, I would say it should be available legally, possibly via, prescription through, psychiatrist or whatever, so that it can be another in the lexicon of tools of therapy or whatever.
How about legal for fun?
That's a tough issue. I think that's a tough issue. I probably haven't given that enough thought.
Because obviously that's how you've done it.
Yeah, for me it's purely recreational. It's been purely recreational. I don't know. It's pretty hard to answer that question without sounding like you have a double standard, or it's hard for me to answer that question without sounding like I have a double standard.
And what would the double standard be?
Double standard would be, I wouldn't want to be prosecuted for having done it, but I also don't think it should be legal because I think that there are people who could harm themselves with it. So that sounds like a double standard.
You don't think just making it an age limit would take care of it?
I don't think it's a function of age.
Yeah.
I mean, the argument that a young impressionable mind could be affected by it deleteriously more so than an older person, I think can be countered by the fact that I think young people can withstand almost anything, physically and emotionally more than than people can later in life. They can withstand direct trauma or whatever more. So, that's an argument that can go back and forth. I really don't have the facts on that, but I do feel that age limit is not the answer to it.
You said that you put off doing it. You didn't do it when you were young.
That's right. I was. A number of my friends were doing it, and it was in sort of 1968, 69, 70. I lived in Canada at the time, so we were getting that kind of crest of the wave of the 60s a couple of years later than everybody else, at least where I lived, fairly sort of remote from the major centers, cultural centers. And
you were interested in everything else of the counterculture.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I was, politically, I would say I was very radical. I was not conservative at all.
And you were into the music
and the music and everything else, and I was probably one of the, at a conceptual level, one of the wildest kids in the school. But for me personally, the loss of physical control or mental control inherent in any kind of drug, alcohol, marijuana, whatever, was an abhorrent concept. But basically, it was a bit puritanical. It was not an informed decision. It was just a fear of loss of control, loss of personal control, and it took me a while to break through that.
What changed?
Having somebody that I trusted say that it would be all right, and just seeing basically that you didn't die from it, after a couple of years.
And what led up to you doing it the first time? Was it a big decision, or more spontaneous?
It was. I think it was a fairly spontaneous decision at that point. I mean, in other words, I had reached a point where I was comfortable doing something like that. Had enough confidence in myself. 22, 23, something like that.
Okay. Let's see. Any other general thoughts about what it does, how it works?
Well, I mean, I've read the scientific literature of what it does at a biochemical level in terms of altering the neurotransmitter function and that sort of thing. But I don't think that ultimately tells you anything. I think you could probably be a scientist and study LSD your entire life and not understand it if you didn't ever take any. And that's the biggest problem, is that it's entirely subjective. Even your own memory of an acid experience is a shabby tin-type photograph of something that happened. Our memory just can't keep the physical, emotional, visual details of something that intense. You have to do it, and there's no way to tell somebody about it. And I don't think there's any way of bringing it back, either cinematically or or literarily or any other way. It just has to be directly experienced, and it's an entirely subjective thing. So in that way, I think it's very good because it can be a confidence builder. You're in a world by yourself, basically. You're the world of your own mind, and you have to learn how to deal with it. And those are building blocks. I think that if it goes well, it can be confidence building. You'll find out a basic sense of yourself and what your capabilities are at a very raw and primal level.
What do you make of the ESP or clairvoyant aspect of the people you're with when you're on the drug.
I think
you can communicate without speaking.
I've had that feeling. I had an interesting experience once on one trip with my wife again. We were alone, and I had a pet lizard, a monitor lizard, and it was normally it was a very aggressive creature, but when provoked, but unless it was physically provoked, it would just lay in its cage and never move. And I had this strange experience that while we were peaking on the drug, the lizard went bananas for no external physical reason. We were sitting on the couch nearby, 10, 15 feet away, basically not moving, not doing anything, not talking. And it just went absolutely insane, lashing around in its cage. It was hitting the glass with its tail so hard that I was certain I was going to break it. It had never done that before, and it never did it since. And I got the strange sense that it was somehow responding to us. But whether there's a physical explanation for that, I don't know. Maybe we emit a certain, we communicate chemically at a level we don't really understand very well in terms of pheromones. Possibly there may have been some sort of biochemical reason for it to do that. But I had an uncanny sense at the time that it was just responding to our mental state.
I could see that could be sociological, as far as the lizard saw you behaving in a way that he doesn't normally see you behaving.
Yeah, but the lizard is functioning on a very, very tiny chip, basically, and is almost completely immune to the behavior of humans around it, except it's a very immediate sphere. If you put your hand in its cage, it would attack it. But you could tap on the glass, make faces, do things. People would come in and out all day, pass it, and it would never react that way. So I can't buy that from the standpoint of the normal senses of sight and hearing.
What did you think at the time when you were
at the
on
time?
it?
I thought that the lizard was responding to our state, to our altered perceptual state.
Did you try to communicate with it more?
I think I went over and looked at it, and it was just so insane. It was actually quite a powerful display of energy, of extremely primal energy on the part of this creature. It just went nuts. But I think there's a possible physical explanation for that, which is that very, very, very microscopic amounts of LSD obviously probably can have an effect on the nervous system of a simple creature, and it may have been communicated through the air or something like that, in the sense that a pheromone can be communicated through sweat or whatever. Only a few molecules might be enough to trigger off such a simple creature. Just a theory, but I tend to, the way my mind works, I always tend to go for a physical explanation before some ephemeral, unproven energy or vibration that has never been indicated. I studied physics before I started as a filmmaker. Now I've got a lot of faith in the physical universe. One man's opinion. One thing that I specifically remember, and it's an image, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror with a carton of milk for some reason. Don't ask me how that came to happen. And I was slightly past the peak, and I was moving around, but I was still very, very, very heavily involved in visual, auditory distortions and so on. And I took a big drink from this carton of milk, and I was watching myself in the mirror, and I had this strange perception of myself as completely removed from the normal upright plane of gravity, where I didn't see myself as an upright being. I saw myself as if, and this is going to sound strange, not that I saw myself as an earthworm, but I saw myself as an earthworm in the sense that I was a tube that took elements from the world in at one end and passed them out at the other end. No, it wasn't a scatological vision at all. It was just simply, I'm this tube. And the entire living world consists of tubes of various types that take part of the physical world in one end and pass it out the other end, and that's what they do. And all of the other functions, whether you're a fish and you have fins, or a bird and you fly, or you're a human and you walk upright, all of those things are only appurtenances to the basic function of getting the tube to a point where it can ingest matter from the world and pass it through itself and go out the other end. Meanwhile, it has to avoid other tubes which want to pass it through them, and it also has to have a brain which is at various levels of development for different creatures to determine how best to do that, how to find it, how to dissociate the bad from the good, the things that will do you harm from the things that won't, and avoid getting passed through other tubes. That's interesting perception. I mean, it's just an alternate way of looking at everything. But it took away all sense of I'm an upright being. I felt like I was an illustration in a biology book where where everything is always laid out horizontally, whether it's a flatworm, an earthworm, a frog, whatever. There's no primates are really the only creatures that move on an upright plane anyway. So basically it was probably some sort of racial memory going back.
Do you think you could have thoughts? Let's see the way to phrase this question. As a scientist, you have a scientific background. Do you imagine you could have thoughts that could lead to a scientific breakthrough on acid?
Absolutely, I think so. Absolutely, at the level of physics, of very very pure science, physics and mathematics, quantum physics and things like that. I think you could make associations. You could think about energy and the movement of particles and so on